Hey folks, it's Todd Dills back with another edition of the Overdrive Radio podcast. This one featuring an expansive discussion I had with longtime professional driver Tom Kyrk about quite a lot, but chiefly his involvement in the relatively new TNC Radio streaming station, gearing itself to speak directly to individuals at the intersection between pro four-wheel drivers and all of you, professional truck owner, operators, and drivers. Kyrk's gotten involved interviewing guests and contributing in various ways after a decade and a half plus of a trucking career, all of it as a company driver. He's still hauling to this day, as he tells in the beginning portion of today's podcast. He spent 14 years with Stevens Transport before, in recent years, moving over in a team operation to IBI Secured Transport. Here's a message from him to any teams out there about that operation.
We're always looking for a few good teams.
TNC is live today with 24/7 programming at tncradio.live. That's T as in Tom, N as in Nancy, C radio.live. Easily accessible via your smartphone for listening on the road, and stay tuned for more about it all from Kyrk. Likewise, a bit of a public service announcement from us at Overdrive and the readership that's directed to everybody's four-wheeled friends out there about sharing the road at the very end. Before I hand it off to Kyrk for an intro to the man's history in trucking and so much more, here's a quick word from Overdrive Radio's sponsors.
First Guard provides commercial truck insurance to leased owner-operators done right, as we've done for more than 80 years. We provide physical damage and non-trucking. Many companies make you pay up to 6 months of insurance premiums up front, but not First Guard. We bill monthly, so you get quality insurance without needing to pay a lot of cash up front. Go to firstguard.com. That's 1stguard.com. First Guard. We speak trucker. Let's talk.
Synchrony Car Care is a robust program built for your business and your customers. We offer drivers a way to pay for the services and parts they need today, but there's so much more to Synchrony Car Care. We treat your customers as an extension of your brand, and we don't take it lightly. We're committed to a simple application and fair terms. Let us help drive traffic and drive success for your business.
Actually, just over 16 years ago, I was working retail at Radio Shack, and we had one of those special customers come in, and he was one of the ones that just couldn't kind of take a joke, didn't want to listen to what was being told, and was going to get me fired and everything else, was getting more and more belligerent. And I'd worked retail about 10 years. I was actually getting ready to have some heel spur surgery. I was just hurting real bad that day, and it just finally got to the point where I slammed my keys down on the counter, because if I didn't walk out the door quitting, it was going to be a case of me putting him through a plate glass window. And, so I took a break, did some odd jobs for a little bit, and had looked into trucking a couple of times, and it got to a point where I knew I needed to do a little bit better. So I ended up going to a local trucking school, got some information from them, and started their program. And actually, because of a workers' comp injury I had while at Radio Shack, I actually qualified for a PH opera training program, got into trucking that way, where I didn't have to pay, anything and things like that.
Okay.
And started driving, I think it was October 26th or 28th. I always mixed the date up, because one of them was my hire date for Radio Shack, and the other one was the hire date for Stevens Transport. Drove there for about 14 and a half years. And towards the end there, the fit wasn't as good. They had lost a lot of the small company feel that they had. And was it a bad company? No, but I just wasn't happy there anymore. And I've been looking for some other options. And IBI, that Idello works for, her and I had talked, an opening came up there. And I'm like, you know what? This makes sense for me to go and do something different. And talk about a change. I went from a solo company position to a team position, an entirely different style of management, where, like a lot of big companies, Stevens, I don't want to say micromanage you, because compared to some of the big companies, they don't. Right. But compared to what we are here, they micromanage you. I mean, here you pretty much pick your own routes, pick your fuel stops. They tell you, this is what we need you to do this week. Get it done, make it happen.
Yeah.
And beyond that, it's up to you to be responsible enough to make it happen. So it takes a lot of getting used to not having to check with the boss for every little step like you did at a big company. So, okay, I did this, I'm doing this now. And here it's just like you go from A to B to C. As long as you do your job, that's what they care about. And that's really kind of a nice thing. And it's got some of the larger company benefits, but we have maybe about somewhere between 10 and 20 trucks total between the different divisions. And so it is a small company, but for me, it's a lot better. It's a lot better fit.
You guys aren't in a system where you're, planning your loads and things of that nature, right?
No, they go and do it. Because mainly, we plan in the sense that we do the trip planning and figure out how to get from A to B.
But you're not selecting your own loads.
No, a lot of our stuff is contract freight. So they haven't figured out and kind of set us up. But as a rule of thumb, like on a Thursday, Friday, you've got a clue what you're going to do for the next week.
Yeah.
So it works real well that way, and they keep us as busy as you want. So, it's one of these things. I joke that I work about half as hard as I did at a big company. I make close to twice the amount of money.
Yeah, well.
So
is it a mileage based plan or something else in terms of?
It is a mileage-based pay, and then we get hourly for certain tasks or flat fees for certain tasks. Right. I'm not going to say we get paid for every single thing that we do, but we get paid for a huge chunk of it. This is one of the companies that, for me, I'm real happy here. Idella, who used to be an owner-operator,
Kyrk has mentioned her twice now. Regular readers will recognize just whom he's talking about in Idella Marie Hansen, longtime hauler who's been featured in various ways in past coverage, including a memorable interview featured in episode 7 of our Over the Road podcast co-production with PRX's Radiotopia. Hansen was among long-haul Paul Marhofer's Hall, that's Haul, Hall of Fame, in that episode.
She often says, I'd never go back to owner operating after coming here.
Wow.
The benefits for how hard I have to work for what I get paid, I wouldn't go back to it. And like I said, for what we do, almost anything that you need for the truck, they reimburse you for. You don't have to go and ask for permission if you want to stay in a hotel. Right. That kind of stuff. They've got their basic policies, and like I said, it's a team operation. So one of the reasons, I'll be honest, I do work half as hard is I got someone else in the truck. But that said, even on the days when I am working, every day, it doesn't feel as hard work as it did sometimes at Stevens. So, or other companies. And I'm not saying Stevens was a bad company. It just was. I don't know if it was I had changed or they had changed so much, but it was just one of those things where I had reached a point in my driving career where it was a starter company, and I wanted to grow, and my growth there was limited. Here, there is depending on what you call growth. Yeah, it might be limited for some people, but it's different every day. There's a lot of new challenges here. I like it. 10, 20 years, I might change my mind. But for now, I'm pretty happy here. If somebody's looking for teamwork, this is not a bad company to look at.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's right for everybody, but it's definitely not a bad company if someone wants team freight. We're always looking for teams, for good teams. Wow. Occasionally there are single driver openings, but they're rare. But when they do happen, it's a matter of being in the right place at the right time. Right. they don't like doing team matching because they are such a small company. It gets into a whole bunch of problems when they try to do that.
Yep.
They prefer you find your own partner and bring your own teammate in. But yeah, as long as you meet all their criteria, they're always looking. We're always looking for a few good teams.
Yeah.
And yes, I know that's cliche, but that's really the truth.
We were going to talk about your side pursuit, which is somewhat recent development. I know because just a couple of weeks ago you interviewed me. So it's for the TNC Radio .live internet radio station that is I guess not 100% entirely, but mostly built for the express purpose of getting information and entertainment out to folks that are on the road, and specifically professional drivers. You have a show on there. Tell me about how it came to be, what it's called, and when folks can hear it.
Well, first of all, they can listen to it 24 hours a day. This is a real radio station that plays music, traffic, information, news, various programming throughout the day. But it got originally started in July. I want to say it was July 1st of 2019. What a time to start a radio station in the middle of a pandemic.
2020 was it last year?
Yeah, 2020. So
okay.
We just celebrated our 1-year anniversary just over a month ago.
As will be probably obvious to the attentive listener, Kyrk and I were speaking in August, almost 2 months back now.
And originally one of their focuses was going to be on transportation, this transportation network channel. And they were going to do a heavier focus on Lyft and Uber, ride-share delivery type things. And the pandemic, obviously, the Uber and Lyft drivers with the pandemic, they weren't out on the road. So the station was trying to figure out, who's out here. We want to get this station up and running. But they noticed during the pandemic that truckers were out there needing information, looking for resources on news, information, where they could find food, anything that really pertains to drivers. So they made a shift to be much more focused on the trucking side, and they still did and do some stuff for Lyft and Uber drivers, because one of the things that I have noticed over the last, really off and on through the last several years of my driving career, is how many times when I go to a truck stop in a Lyft or Uber, how many times I'm being asked by a Lyft and Uber driver, how do I become a truck driver?
Sure.
Or I used to be a truck driver, or something like that. So there's a really close connection between the two.
Yeah, I get into those conversations with Lyft drivers as well, just locally here. Just somebody asks you what you do, and I say I work for Overdrive, and they're like, "What's that?" It's trucking magazines. And then the questions begin.
And so, being kind of the resident trucking expert, I'm asked sometimes to go on interviews with people from the station with Uber, Lyft driver podcasts and talk about trucking and things like that. And other times, on some of our programming, I'll ask questions that every driver wants to know, like, is there a etiquette on, what you should do or shouldn't do in the car? Things that to some people who use it all the time may be common sense, but this, somebody who only uses it on a rare occasion, because trucks are our homes. So these and we always want people to respect our trucks. So by the same token, these Lyft and Uber drivers' cars are their business. So it's kind of like, hey, I want people to respect my place of employment / home. I want to give them the same courtesy. So, we have some really interesting conversations. And how I got involved with the station was last fall when Truckers Christmas Group was doing some of their fundraisers. They had reached out to me to learn more about us and do some interviews. And I did a few interviews about Truckers Christmas Group with them, got to know Tom and Shelley, two of the founding partners. And about the time of the ice storm that hit Houston last year, Louisiana, they had asked me, would you mind coming on just as some emergency fill-in help? to talk about winter driving and a few other things, because we have a lot of people down south who know very little about it. And, whether they're car drivers or whatever, because our audience base, if you look at it, we've got Lyft and Uber drivers, we have regular people, we have, some truck drivers, bus drivers, a couple train people. We really do cover the gamut of, let's say, transportation in terms of listeners.
Yeah.
So they had me on, and I helped out on that and a couple other things. And next thing I knew, I got drug in to helping out on the morning, evening traffic and news shows. They run from 8 to 10 Central Monday through Friday, and then 4 to 6 Central of an evening Monday through Friday.
Okay.
So I pretty much, if I'm parked, I may be looking up stories and things like that. But if I'm going down the road, we have other people to look up the stories. And sometimes I'll get asked opinion. And you know me, Todd, I don't have an opinion on anything.
Yeah, of course not.
I never have any opinions, but so we've developed, I think, a pretty good morning and evening show where we look at some of the traffic around Houston, some of the traffic around the country. We try to keep drivers informed. I mean, one of the things I'm personally proud of is back when the I-40 bridge in Memphis had all of its issues.
Yep.
I was monitoring some of the news out there that day because I was parked, and all of a sudden on one of our commercial breaks, Tom, I says, we got breaking news coming from Tennessee, and I told them what it was. We need to really focus on this. We brought it as a breaking news story and, covered that. And over the next several weeks, I was able to reach out to one of the professors who had written some papers on how he thought this had happened out of the University of Memphis there, made some great contacts with RDOT, their public information department.
Yep.
And we were able to do a different type of coverage, and let's say Overdrive and the other written publications did, by bringing in some of these people, where we could do late breaking news and certain things like that, or more in-depth interviews where we could ask questions. And in some cases, we might get an email during an interview from somebody who is listening saying, hey, I'd like to know the following, so we could kind of ask that question, things like that.
Yeah, totally.
And, I'm very proud of some of the coverage we were able to do on that. We've had some, couple days where it's just been horrific traffic accidents where we've been able to try to keep drivers informed as to what's going on. And when you're done with a day like that, it's kind of stressful trying to keep up with everything. But, you're done at the end of the day, you're going, okay, cool. Hopefully I made a driver's day a little brighter with some humor, and we gave them a lot of information they needed. And, we've tried to do interviews in our different shows on things that will interest drivers, like the Minneapolis truck parking problem with the city council. We've had the Minnesota Trucking Association on. We'll do some stuff like that. And then we do a lot of humor. So like some days on those morning and evening shows, particularly if it's a really slow day, Thursdays have a tendency to be slow. Not exactly sure why, but they do. So we might do a little bit of trivia with some of the hosts on there, or guess that tune or something like that. That's a little bit of fun. And I know I always find it hilarious when I'm listening in to the show because I'm working or on vacation or whatever, and I find myself yelling at the radio, "What do you mean you don't know that? It's this!" So I'm sure we've got people doing that, and we're looking at growing the station. Sometime I know in late August to early mid-September, we have a whole bunch of new programs that we're bringing on to the afternoon and evening.
You can take a look at that programming via the schedule page for the online network at tncradio.live/schedule.
Basically, how the basic programming works now is, we have our morning show, which starts about 8 a.m. and runs till 10.
Yep.
Then we basically re-air the previous day's Landline Now podcast.
Sure.
Then we go into a bunch of some of the best trucking and Uber Lyft podcasts that are out there till around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And it's interspersed with some music and comedy and things of that nature. And then around 3 o'clock, Shelley Johnson comes on with the Truckers Network radio show. And That's a show where she interviews people over about an hour, and sometimes it'll be more of an entertainment focus. We've had John Schneider on, Lee Greenwood, Bill Weaver, Paul Mahofer, Tony Justice. Other times it may be more informational, where we bring on experts, maybe mental recall and business. Not too long ago, we had a relationships expert who gave tips on if you're going through a divorce, some of the do's and don'ts, so you can keep your sanity and things of that nature. And then we'll obviously do trucking topic themes, where we may bring on different drivers to talk about different topics. So that show's really a great informational show, and that's 3 to 4 Central. Then at 4, we go into our
back to the evening show.
Back to the evening show with the kind of the live news updates and information and things of that. And then 6 is, music and comedy and things like that. A little later in the evening, we do some stuff with Dan Cilio for sports and a few other shows going up until midnight. And I'd have to look at the programming schedule, because I should have it all memorized, but I'll be honest, I don't. But I know we do some
overnight
radio programs, on things like that. But I know coming up, like I said, late August, early mid-September, our evenings are going to change up quite a little bit with bringing in some more programming, new shows. I'm working on one where I talk with people involved in trucking, much like the interview I did with you a couple of weeks ago, which we'll be playing at some point in the future, where, how did you get involved in trucking? Why you think it's interesting? And a lot of the conversation will be with drivers. Some of it is trying to, preserve some of the memories of the old truck stops and memorable people who may no longer be with us, but also, getting information that's just useful for people to know.
The audio gremlins messed with our connection at this point in the conversation, but just for a brief moment. Tom Kyrk was going into a bit of summation of a piece he'd planned around Uncle Pete's truck stop in Lebanon, Tennessee, east of Nashville here.
One of the things that a lot of drivers may not know, that small truck stop's still there. It still has pretty good food, and it's a unique place with his huge mug collection. But unfortunately, last year, trucking lost a wonderful person by the name of Phyllis, who had been a waitress there for years. And she was a phenomenal human being. A lot of drivers knew her and appreciated her. And that's some of what my show is going to be focused on, is trying to preserve some of these memories that different drivers have, the stories of the past, but also information that will go forward into the future. And occasionally we may talk about different topics of a more serious nature and what we can learn from them. So, and sometimes it'll be just me and one person talking. Sometimes it may be if I can get 2 or 3 on a topic and let them talk. I mean, the ultimate goal of my show, and I know no one, probably even you won't believe this, Todd, my ultimate goal is for me to talk as little as possible during the show and listen to what they're saying. One of the things that I find interesting is asking people like yourself, how did you get into covering trucking, and why are you still here? Because sometimes I wonder why anyone would find us group of old curmudgeons interesting.
Why are you still here, Tom? That's what I want to know.
There's a simple answer to that question. I'm addicted to the diesel.
You really are? Okay.
I'm like a lot of drivers, and I think a lot of it comes down to this. I've often thought about other things I can do, and people have often asked me, "Oh, you're so smart, or you're so this. Why aren't you doing marketing, or why aren't you more involved in journalism, or any one of other careers?" And some of it is I don't have the patience to deal with idiots on a daily basis. At least in trucking, if I have to deal with idiots too much, I can go inside my list. Depending on what the problem is, I can call my boss and go, "Hey, we have an issue here. You deal with it. You get paid for it." And 99% of the time, when I deal with an idiot going down the road, I'm sure they think the same thing about me. If I slow down a little bit, they're going to go ahead of down the road faster than I am.
Speaking of being addicted to the diesel, what's the truck that you're in right now?
We're in a Volvo VNL 760.
One of the pretty new one, or recent model?
2 years old now.
2 years old.
So And basically I got it with just a couple hundred miles on it, whatever was needed to deliver it and get the work that our company had ready for the drivers.
Yep.
So for practical purposes, I was the first driver to drive it.
Is that a unit that you're familiar with? A model that you're familiar with from previous experience?
This is the first Volvo I've ever driven. When I was at Stevens, I mostly was in Kenworth and a single Cascadia. This is I shouldn't say that. When I first started this company, I was in a VNL 660.
Okay.
And then when we did some rejiggering of some teams around, I ended up in this particular truck. And it's like I said, extremely happy with it. I'm not a brand person in the sense that as long as the truck is reliable and makes me money, I don't really care what it is as long as it's safe to drive and reasonably comfortable. My biggest concern is it reliable? Is it safe? And will it make me money? Right. If it meets those criteria, everything else is secondary.
How's the comfort compare on this one to the previous models that you had driven?
To the Volvo 660, it's quite a little bit more comfortable. The slightly longer wheelbase would ride better, but compared to the Kenworths, I would say they're reasonably comparable.
Okay.
It's one of those things. To me, it's sometimes when you can't switch back and forth the truck a little bit, you kind of forget what the other one was like.
Yep.
The biggest complaint I have about the Volvo, they drive a little bit too much like a car. The way the steering and everything is set up, it's very responsive, which is good, but it's also very responsive, which is bad. So sometimes you almost forget. I mean, you don't forget you're driving a big truck in certain senses because of the scale of everything, but just the way it handles, there's going down the road, sometimes it's the steering wheel is a little bit more car-like than I would prefer.
Right.
The Kenworth, I think, required a little bit more input to the steering wheel than this truck does. I'm not saying a lot more, but
it's just like a difference in it's like a small grade of feel that's just a little bit different.
Exactly. And I mean, we're not talking a safety difference there, but I also know other people who swear they like the way these trucks handle better because it is more car-like. So I think a lot of it is on your personal preference and driving style. I grew up working on a farm, so I was used to things that didn't have power steering, some as a kid and things of that nature. So moving up to these trucks, it was luxury in comparison. Air ride and power steering and all this other stuff. And the school that I went to, we had some really, really old trucks that we learned on for backing and things like that. So I got a taste of what like air assist was like and things of that nature on the steering, where you had to work a little bit. So it did give you appreciation for this much better equipment. And I'm sure there's some people out there at Kenworth that are screaming, how could I ever say this? I'm not sure where I see that much of a difference in ride and handling at the end of the day between the new Kenworth 680 and this VNL 760. If I go back to the days of the T2000, that was a lot more basic truck. I mean, it rode decent and everything like that, but it was definitely basic. I do think the fit and finish on Kenworth is maybe a little bit better than Volvo.
Okay.
But once again, you're getting into the argument of for people who remember Mercury versus Ford.
A little nuanced, though quite simple truck preferences discussion to finish it out with Tom Kyrk there. Again, you can hear all of the programming he talked about via TNC Radio.live. And earlier in the program, Tom mentioned the push and pull, the give and take and back and forth between Uber and Lyft drivers and Class 8 trucking professionals the TNC Radio folks are hoping to facilitate. We'll close it out with a little bit of that ourselves here with that little PSA I mentioned up at the top. Part of the Channel 19 special series of mini episodes originally produced with the Over the Road podcast team in 2020. This one features our own Overdrive Extra contributor, Gary Bucks, with a little driver's ed about navigating around big trucks for our four-wheeled friends. At the opening, you'll hear another familiar voice too, that of none other than Tom Kyrk, offering some perspective on the room trucks need to maneuver. Enjoy it. Feel free to share it around, of course, with your four-wheeled friends. If you didn't do so the first time it aired, more than a year ago now. I'll drop a link to the standalone version in the show notes and the post that houses this podcast for October 1st, 2021. You can find it at overdriveonline.com/overdrive-radio. Here we go. Hey, it's Todd Dills again with Overdrive Magazine, here to answer your questions about trucking.
My name is Carter Mize, calling from Denton, Texas, the home of the Peterbilt factory.
And since we opened up the phone lines a few months back, we've heard from a lot of you wanting to know the same thing.
How regular drivers can help truckers be more courteous on the highways so that we can all be more safe.
How can cars and trucks coexist in the road?
How can we be safer on the road together?
You wanted to know what our trucking listeners appreciate.
Rules of the road that you really appreciate we followed.
And what really gets under their skin.
Things that are annoying or maybe even dangerous for truckers.
So we asked.
I think the biggest thing I'd like people to understand about trucking is that truck drivers need room to maneuver.
And well, everyone we talked to pretty much said the same thing.
Just give them room.
Don't cut in front of them and slam on your brakes. It takes a football field to stop a truck.
You really want to pull in front of me and stop on a dime?
So for this Channel 19 special, I guess you could say it's Driver's Ed Day, Highway Cutoff Edition.
Yeah, this is exactly what I did this week with over 500 driver's ed students in Chicago.
And we'll be in good hands. Meet your instructor.
My name is Gary Books. I live in central Illinois, about 30 miles outside of Bloomington.
I've known Gary for close to a decade at this point, but just a few years ago I took a run in his truck with him from where I live in Nashville up to the northwest corner of Illinois. I'd already been writing about trucking for a while by then, but that trip, watching Gary in action and hearing his play-by-play commentary on the flow of vehicles around him, it fundamentally changed the way I drive on the highway. What really stuck with me is the importance of following distance. That is, the space you leave between yourself and the vehicle in front of you.
Know your stopping distance and know that you need to be able to do it at a safe pace.
From a highway speed, your car can stop pretty quickly, in just a few seconds. But for an 80,000-pound tractor-trailer, it's much different.
Pretty true that for every 10 miles an hour, it will take you a little bit more than 1 second to stop. So it can take a truck 7 to 8 to 9 seconds to stop at a highway speed.
And guess how far the truck will travel in that time?
700 feet. And I know this from experience, and I've been caught with an emergency stop situation.
Gary has actually put this to a test by programming his GPS to drop virtual breadcrumbs as he drives.
I had a program in my truck that tracked a breadcrumb every second, and I was going 45 miles an hour. I hit my brakes as quick as I could, and it took me 4.5 seconds to stop that truck, 450 feet.
He also has a nice trick to make sure he leaves enough space in front of his truck.
I have a little sticker on my windshield, and I paced out 700 feet, and that I use like a sight line to keep that open space that I have to manage in front of my truck.
Meaning, if he can see a car below that sticker on the windshield, he needs to back off and leave more space.
No one else is going to manage that space in front of my truck, and that's the most important space for me to be safe.
Of course, what Gary can't control is what the other cars and trucks do around him. And this is where the driver's ed portion of the episode comes in. There's another trick Gary taught me that in retrospect seems obvious, but is something that I've found few of my friends or family members ever do. It has to do with how you pass a truck.
Everyone wants to drive faster than the truck. They want to be in front. They can't see around the truck well. But think about, do I really need to pass? And if we're going to pass, try to avoid passing on the right side, because that's where we have the most trouble seeing other vehicles and people.
That's the first part. But say you've decided to pass, and you're doing it on the left side like he said, then what?
Here's my suggestion. It's pretty simple. When you get to the front of the truck, when you're beside that front tire, that steer tire, if you're going to change lanes to the right in front of the truck, put your turn signal on to the right, indicate to everyone around you that that's your intention. Proceed forward. Don't pull in right away. Proceed forward when you can see the full front of the truck in your rearview mirror, looking out the back window. You're about 100 feet in front of a truck generally by then. Then slowly begin to come over.
Okay, got that? Don't start the merge before you can at least see the whole truck in the rearview mirror.
Speed and spacing. You have to be aware of those things, and it's a constant adjustment.
Before I met Gary, I'd never used this particular tactic of signaling well before I actually changed lanes. And the signaling is key because that's what tells the impatient driver on your back bumper to sit tight, so they're not tempted to swing into the right lane too early to cut off the truck either. Thus, you can avoid yet another instance of the infuriating highway cutoff. It works. And those truckers watching it play out behind you, well, I know they'll thank you. And one more thing a couple of you asked about. If a truck passes you, flash your headlights when the trailer clears your front bumper to let them know they've got room to come back over. Key thing here is to actually turn the lights on, then back off, or vice versa if it's nighttime. Just don't use those high beams. The Channel 19 special is a feature of Over the Road from Radiotopia and Overdrive Magazine. It's produced by Ian Koss and myself, Todd Dills, with support from Lacey Roberts, Paul Marhofer, and Julie Shapiro. Since we talked to Gary for this edition, the owner-operator has sold his Freightliner and retired from the road, though he still keeps a wheel or two in the lane via one-on-one business coaching, mentoring those new to trucking or in need of a fresh start. You can find more of his insights via the Overdrive Extra Group blog, where he's a regular contributor. Find it at overdriveonline.com. Thanks also to the truckers whose voices you heard at the top: Tom Kyrk, Devery Jones, Jason Earlywine, Tad Schultz, and Sue Weesey. Overdrive Radio is a production of Overdrive, the voice of the American trucker. It's edited and produced by me, Todd Dills, with additional support from Overdrive Extra contributing writer Paul Marhofer, Overdrive news editor Matt Cole, social media coordinator Holly Young, and executive editor Alex Lockey. Till next time, keep it pro out there.